Hello everyone, this is Mrs. G's Story Time, and we are reading Treasures of the Snow by Patricia St. John with permission of Moody Publishing Company. And we are on Chapter 3, A Very Special Christmas Present. It was Christmas Eve again, 5 years after the beginning of this story, and Danny was now 5 years old. It was a great day because for the first time in his life he had been considered old enough to go down to the church with Annette and to see the tree. He sat up in bed drinking a bowl of potato soup and his blonde hair only just showing above his enormous white feather duvet, which was almost as fat as it was wide. Annette sat beside him, and in her hand she held a shining gingerbread bear. "I'm sorry, Danny," she said firmly, "but you cannot have it in bed with you. It would be all crumbs by morning. Look, I'll put it here on the cupboard, and the moon will shine in on him, and you'll be able to see him." Danny opened his mouth to argue, but he changed his mind and filled his mouth with potato soup and said it was unfair of his sister to say he couldn't hug his bear all night, but after all, there were lots of other things to be happy about. Danny was always happy from the moment he opened his eyes in the morning to the moment he closed them at night. Tonight he was especially happy because he had heard the bells and saw the glittering Christmas tree and had been out in the snow by starlight. He handed his empty bowl to Annette and cuddled down under his feather duvet. "Do you think," he asked, "that Father Christmas will come if I put my slippers on the windowsill?" Annette looked rather startled and wondered where he had heard of such a thing, for in Switzerland, Father Christmas is not such a well-known person as he is in England. Swiss children have their Christmas bear from the tree on Christmas Eve and presents from their family on New Year's Day. On Christmas Day they go to church and have a feast, but few children get a present. "They said," went on Danny, "that he came on a sled drawn by reindeer and left presents in good children's slippers. Am I a good child, Annette?" "Yes," answered Annette, kissing him. "You're a very good child, but you will not get a present from Father Christmas. He only goes to rich little boys." "Aren't I a rich little boy?" asked Danny, who thought he had everything he wanted in life. "No," replied Annette firmly. "You are not. We are poor, and Papa has to work hard, and Grandmother and I have to go on and on patching your clothes because we cannot afford to buy new clothes." Danny chuckled. "I don't mind being poor," he said firmly. "I like it. Tell me a story, Annette. Tell me about Christmas and the little baby and the cows and the great big shining star." So Annette told the story, and Danny, who should have been asleep, listened with his eyes wide open. "I should have liked sleeping in the hay better than in the inn," he said when she finished. "I should like to sleep with Birgit. I think it would be fun." And that's the name of the cow. Annette shook her head. "No, you wouldn't," she replied. "Not in the winter without a duvet. You would be very cold, unhappy, and long for a warm bed. It was cruel of them to say that there was no room for a little baby. They could have made room somehow." The cuckoo clock on the stairs struck 9, and Annette jumped up. "You must go to sleep, Danny," she said. "I must make Papa's hot chocolate." She kissed him and tucked him in and put out the light and left him, but Danny did not go to sleep. Instead, he lay staring out in the darkness, thinking hard. He was not a greedy little boy, but he could not help thinking that if Father Christmas happened to come to their house, it would be a great pity not to be ready. Of course, it was unlikely he would come, since Danny was only a poor child, but on the other hand, it was just possible he might. After all, it wouldn't hurt to put out that little slipper, even if there was nothing in it in the morning. The question was where to put it. He would not put it on the windowsill because he could not open the high barred shutters by himself, nor could he put it outside the door because the family was all sitting in the front room. The only place was just outside the back door on the little strip of snow that divided the kitchen from the hay barn. Of course, Father Christmas probably wouldn't see it there, but still, there was no harm in trying. Danny's mind was made up. He crept out of the bed and tiptoed carefully across the bedroom and down the stairs. He went barefooted because he did not want anyone to hear him, and in his hand he carried one small scarlet slipper lined with rabbit fur. Annette had made the slippers, and Danny felt Father Christmas might notice them if they were bright and rather unusual. It was a struggle to lift the great wooden bar on the kitchen door, and Danny had to stand on a stool before he managed it. He had a moment's bright glimpse of snow and starlight, and then the bitter cold air struck him like a knife and almost took his breath away. He quickly pushed the slipper onto the step and shut the door again as quickly as he could. Back to the bed scuttled Danny with a light heart. He cuddled down under the bedclothes and curled himself into a ball and buried his nose in the pillows. He had already said his proper prayers with Annette before he got into bed, but now he had a little bit more to add. "Please, dear God," he whispered, "make Father Christmas and his reindeers come this way, and make him see my red slipper, and make him put a little present inside, even if I am only a poor boy." And then the bump that was Danny rolled over sideways and fell asleep to a dream, like thousands of other children all over the world, of the old gentleman in the red cloak careening across the snow to the jingle of reindeer bells. He woke very early because children always wake early on Christmas morning, and of course the first thing he thought of was the scarlet slipper. It was such an exciting thought that his heart felt a happy bump with a great thump, and he peeked out over the top of his duvet to see whether Annette was awake. But Annette was fast asleep with her long, fair hair spread all over the pillow, and for all Danny knew it might have well been in the middle of the night. In fact, he almost decided that it must be in the middle of the night when he heard his father clanging the milk churns in the kitchen below. So it must be Christmas morning, and Danny must get down quickly or his father would open the door and find his present before he did. Somehow Danny was absolutely sure that there would be a present. All his doubts of the night before had vanished in his sleep. He crept out of the room without waking Annette and slipped into the kitchen where his father was cleaning out the churns. Father did not see Danny until he felt two hands clasping his legs and looked down. There was his son, rosy, bright-eyed, with his hair all scruffy, looking up at him. "Has Father Christmas been?" asked Danny. Surely his father, who stayed up so late and got up so early, must have heard the bells or the crunch of the hoofs on the snow. "Father Christmas?" replied his father in a puzzled voice. "Why, no, he didn't come here. We live too far up the mountain for him." But Danny shook his head. "We don't," he said eagerly. "His reindeer can go anywhere, and I expect you were asleep and didn't hear him. Open the door for me, Papa, in case he has left me a present." The father wished he had known about this earlier. I would have put a chocolate stick on the step. But he hated to disappoint his boy. Somehow he had to open the back door to roll the churns across to the stable, so he lifted the latch. In an instant, Danny dived between his legs like an eager rabbit and was kneeling by his slipper in the snow. Then he gave a wild, high-pitched scream of excitement and dove back again into the kitchen with his slippers in his hand. A miracle had happened. Father Christmas had been and left a present, and in all his happy 5 years of life, Danny had never had such a perfect present before. For curled up in the furry lining of his scarlet slipper was a tiny white kitten, with blue eyes and one black smudge on her nose. It was a weak, thin little kitten, very nearly dead with the cold and hunger, and if it had not been for the warmth of the rabbit fur, it would have certainly been quite dead. But it was still breathing lightly, and Danny's father, forgetting all about the churns, knelt down on the kitchen floor beside his son and set about making it better. First he wrapped it in a piece of worn flannel and laid it against the hot wall of the stove. And then he heated milk on a pan and fed it with a spoon, as it was far too weak to suck. At first it only spluttered and dibbled, but after a while it put out a soft pink tongue, and its dim blue eyes grew bright and interested. Then, after 5 minutes or so, it twitched its tail and stretched itself. And finally, having had quite enough to eat, it curled itself up into a ball and sat up in a faint, contented purr. All this time, Danny and his father had not spoken one word because they were so intent on what they were doing. But now their work was successfully finished for the time being, and they sat back and looked at each other. Danny's cheeks were the color of poppies, and his eyes shone like stars. "I knew he would come," he whispered, "but I never guessed he'd bring such a beautiful present. It is the most beautiful present I have ever had in all my life. What shall I call it, Papa?" "You had better call it Claus, after the Christmas saint," said Papa. "It certainly seems like a miracle." Papa left the sleeping kitten in Danny's care and went to the stables. Sitting in the dim light with his head pressed against the side of the cows and the milk frothing into the pails, he tried to think of some explanation. Of course, the kitten had strayed across from the barn, but it did seem quite wonderful that it should have found Danny's slipper, and it had been all ready for him. After a while, Danny's father decided that perhaps it was not so wonderful after all. Surely it was natural on Christmas night that the Father in heaven, thinking of his own son, would not have wanted to disappoint a motherless child on earth. Surely he had guided the steps of the white kitten for the sake of the baby born in Bethlehem. Danny's father paused for a moment in his milking and thanked God on behalf of his little son. Annette appeared in the kitchen shortly after his breakfast and stood still in amazement at the sight of Danny in his nightshirt and overcoat, watching over a white kitten. She was about to ask questions when Danny put his fingers to his lips to ask her to be quiet, for he was very much afraid of waking the kitten. Then he tiptoed over to her, pulled her down on the chair, and climbed onto her knee and whispered the whole strange story into her ear. Annette had no difficulty explaining it to herself. She believed that such a pure white kitten must have surely dropped straight from heaven. She sat down on the floor and gathered Danny and the kitten onto her lap. And here Grandmother found them a half hour later when she came in expecting to find her Christmas coffee steaming on the table. And tomorrow we're reading chapter 4, The Quarrel Begins. I love you and I'm praying for you. Bye-bye.